hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon.
I could have forgiven them. I wanted to. But that night, as the soft glow of the dining room turned shadows into walls, I heard the one thing a mother should never hear. We were all there, Richard and I, Emily and Jason, gathered for what I thought would be a calm, familiar Sunday dinner. The kind we had hosted for decades, the kind that once made our home feel alive. The table was set with quiet care. Off-white linen napkins gently folded. My mother's old silver laid out with its worn charm. A roast chicken rested at the center, golden and aromatic, its scent mingling with the rosemary potatoes and fresh-baked rolls I had spent the afternoon preparing. Warm candlelight flickered off the crystal glasses, catching the soft curve of steam rising from the food. Outside, the world had cooled into late autumn. A breeze slipped through the cracked kitchen window, carrying with it the scent of distant fireplaces and fallen leaves. The last amber traces of daylight had disappeared beyond the trees, and in their place, dusk settled over our small corner of Pennsylvania like a woolen blanket. But inside, something colder was growing. Emily sat rigid in her chair, picking at her napkin, her lips pressed into a tight line. Jason kept glancing under the table at his phone, thumb twitching, mind clearly elsewhere. He wore a designer watch I didn't recognize. Richard tried, as he always did, to lighten the mood. "Your mother's been talking about bringing the old fountain back," he said, gesturing toward the backyard. "You remember the one you two used to race around when you were little? She thinks it might give the garden some charm again." There was a beat of silence. Emily let out a sharp sigh, her eyes still fixed on her untouched plate. "Mom, Dad," she said, her tone clipped. "We're adults now. You interfere too much in our lives. The constant calls, the advice, the control. We don't need it anymore." The words landed like glass breaking. I blinked once, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. My heart fluttered in my chest, confused, and suddenly alert. Richard shifted beside me, his hand curling slowly around his fork, knuckles pale. Before I could respond, Jason looked up and added, his voice calm and cold. "Honestly, it feels like you're always trying to keep us on a leash with your money. We're tired of it." A strange ringing started in my ears. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft ticking of the clock above the stove, its hands frozen on 6:47. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. Instead, I watched them, my children, sitting in the home Richard and I had built from scratch, speaking to us as though we were burdens they were finally brave enough to shed. Was this how strangers spoke to each other in courtrooms? Carefully rehearsed, distant, detached. I looked at Emily. Her eyes were glassy somewhere far away. Jason seemed almost proud of himself, like he'd just filed a long overdue complaint with customer service. The irony hit me. We had built their lives piece by piece, funded their schools, paid their mortgages, stayed up with them through heartbreaks and illnesses. But now here we were, suddenly too much. Richard finally spoke quietly, a leash. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The weight behind the question did the speaking for him. Emily looked away. Jason shrugged, swirling his wine like he was already celebrating something. "You've always made us feel like we owe you," he said. "Even your help comes with strings." Strings? They meant the nights I sat up with Emily, holding her through panic attacks. They meant the $28,000 we wired to Jason when he lost his job and didn't want his wife to know. They meant the surprise groceries we'd leave on their porches when they were too proud to ask, and the family trips we saved for just to give them something to look forward to. I took a breath and pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped against the hardwood. I didn't speak. I just began clearing the plates one by one. My hands shook slightly as I lifted Emily's untouched dinner, her fork resting neatly like a final period in a cruel sentence. Behind me, Jason went back to texting. Emily sipped her wine and said nothing. The kitchen lights felt harsh now, too bright, washing the walls in a sterile white. I turned them down, letting the candlelight do the work instead. It felt softer, like maybe it could protect me from fully absorbing what had just happened. Richard joined me without a word, carrying the bread basket. His movements were mechanical, measured. He had always been a quiet man, but I could see it in the set of his jaw. He was struggling to contain something sharp and deep. I placed the dishes in the sink one by one, careful not to clatter. The running water covered the silence for a moment. I watched slowly, as if scrubbing the betrayal off the porcelain. Behind us, the dining room had grown still. No one offered to help. No one asked if we were okay. They had come to deliver their message, and they had. When the front door finally closed behind them, it was not with a bang, but with a tidy, well-mannered click. They had left, behind empty glasses, uneaten food, and a silence that echoed louder than any argument. Later that night, I sat in the kitchen wrapped in Richard's old cardigan, a faint scent of cedar and aftershave still clinging to the sleeves. The house felt too big, too quiet. I lit one of the candles I kept in the drawer for special occasions, as if I needed an excuse now to feel human. Richard poured 2 mugs of tea. He added honey to mine without asking, the way he had since our first winter together. When I caught a cold, and he insisted sugar wasn't enough, we sat without speaking. Outside, a wind had picked up. The bare branches of the maple trees topped softly against the windows like they were trying to get in to witness the moment something finally broke. He exhaled slowly and said, "They've forgotten who we are to them." I couldn't argue because it wasn't about forgetting. It was about rewriting the story, making us the footnote in their success, the overbearing relics they had to politely remove. The candle on the table flickered. Somewhere in that silence, as the tea cooled and the shadows grew long, I felt a shift deep inside me. Not rage, not revenge, not yet, just a whisper, a seat of something steady and cold. What if we stopped? The night wasn't silent. Not really. The kitchen clock ticked steadily above the stove, a soft metronome marking the ache between heartbeats. The hum of the refrigerator filled the gaps, and beyond the window, the wind stayed the leafless trees, their bare limbs, scraping lightly against the glass like the slow brushing of fingertips on a coffin lid. But between Richard and me, there were no words. None that would come out anyway. The kind of silence we sat in wasn't empty. It was swollen, full of hurt and unsaid things. The kind of silence that doesn't give you peace, just makes you more aware of how alone you feel. Even when someone is sitting across from you, the light above the kitchen table was dim, just one small bulb inside a frosted glass shade. It cast a muted golden pool over the wooden tabletop, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. The air smelled faintly of tea and melted wax from the candle I'd lit earlier, a small vanilla-scented one, the kind I usually save for guests. Richard poured tea with the same quiet precision he used when fixing things around the house. Steady hands, careful movements. Steam curled from the kettle, soft and ghostly, vanishing into the low ceiling. He didn't ask if I wanted some. Mug in front of me, and the porcelain clinked against the wood. I stayed at it for a moment before wrapping my hands around it. It was warm, but I felt cold. I didn't drink it. My throat was too tight. My stomach felt like it was folded in on itself. I kept hearing their voices. "You interfere too much in our lives." Interfere. That one word cut through me sharper than anything else. As if my love, my effort, my support had been nothing more than meddling. As if years of showing up, helping, caring, sacrificing was something they needed to be free from. My fingers tightened around the mug. My knuckles turned white. I thought about Emily's voice when she said it. Platt, irritated. Not a hint of softness, not even discomfort. Just blunt rejection, like she was doing herself a favor by saying it aloud. I remembered the nights I sat beside her hospital bed when she had her first miscarriage, holding her hand, feeding her ice chips, speaking softly even when she wasn't awake to hear me. I remembered how she cried into my chest, repeating, "I can't do this, Mom," and how I told her she didn't have to do it alone. I thought that meant something, but apparently it was interference. "You're always trying to keep us on a leash with your money." Jason's voice was more polished, less emotional, more cruel somehow, like he had rehearsed it. A leash. That's what he called our help. The down payment for their first home, the tuition checks, the quiet loan we never asked him to pay back. All of it, twisted into control. And he hadn't even looked at me when he said it. He was still checking his phone, still scrolling, barely engaged, like it was just another item on his to-do list. Tell parents we don't need them anymore. I remembered when he was 13 and failed a math test. He sobbed into my arms, saying he was a failure. I stayed up with him that night, helping him review every question, encouraging him, telling him he was smart and capable, that I believed in him. Now I was the problem. The candle on the table flickered gently. A draft must have slipped through the cracks in the old kitchen windows. The flame wavered, then steadied again. Across from me, Richard was silent. His tea sat untouched. His hands were clasped in front of him, fingers laced tightly, elbows resting on the edge of the table. He looked like he was praying or bracing for something. His face, usually calm and unreadable, looked pained, not angry, just deeply, quietly wounded, like something had come undone inside him, and he hadn't figured out how to hold it together again. I finally spoke, my voice no louder than a breath. They meant it. He nodded once slowly, as if each movement cost him something. I watched him for a moment. The man who'd held my hand through childbirth, through loss, through so many little heartbreaks we never told anyone about. We had built this life together, made a home, raised 2 children, given everything we had, time, energy, money, love, and now they wanted nothing from us. They think we've been controlling them, he said finally. I nodded. My throat tightened. I thought we were just being there for them. His eyes met mine. They were red-rimmed. We were. A silence fell between us again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of memory. Like when Emily moved into her first apartment and called me crying because the electricity wouldn't turn on. I drove 45 minutes with a flashlight and a bag of groceries. Or when Jason's wife had their first baby and I stayed up 3 nights in a row helping them adjust. I cooked, I cleaned, I rocked the baby so they could sleep, but they didn't remember those things now. Or maybe they did and decided they no longer mattered. The kitchen felt too big all of a sudden. The walls seemed farther apart, the ceiling higher, like the room was stretching to make space for the absence I felt inside me. I took a sip of the tea. It had cooled. The bitterness lingered. I thought of the birthdays they missed, the times they can led last minute, the text replies that came hours late or not at all, the way holidays became obligations for them. Quick hells, early goodbyes, eyes on the clock. I used to blame it on their busy lives, on adulthood, on stress. Now I knew better. They didn't want us in their lives. Not really. They wanted the help, the backup, the money, but not the people behind it, not the parents. The realization settled over me like dust. Slowly, uncomfortably. I didn't want to feel it, but it was there. I looked around the kitchen. The cabinets Richard built by hand. The photographs on the fridge. Smiling faces drawn in crayon by the grandkids, held up by novelty magnets. The calendar with birthdays circled, holidays planned, family dinners marked in ink. All of it seemed suddenly pointless. They erased us, I said quietly. Richard didn't respond. He didn't need to. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. The warmth of the room didn't reach me. The heater rumbled softly through the vent, but my hands were still cold. I stayed at the candle. The flame burned lower, the wax puddling around its face. It would burn out soon. So would we, unless we stopped trying to keep it going for people who had already turned away. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. But deep inside, a new thought began to form, not loud, not angry, just quiet, firm. What would happen if we stopped making ourselves available? If we stopped giving? Would they even notice? Would they care? And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt for wondering. I just felt tired and ready. The morning after our silence, the house felt different. Not just quiet. It was cold in a way I hadn't noticed before. The kind of stillness that settles into your bones, not from temperature, but from the weight of realization. There was no music playing in the kitchen like there usually was. No scent of cinnamon or fresh bread. The chairs around the breakfast table sat perfectly aligned, untouched. Even the dog next door wasn't barking like he usually did at this hour. It was as if the entire world had paused. Downstairs, I found Richard already dressed. He stood by the coat rack, fully buttoned into his dark wool jacket. His shoes were polished. His hair, still mostly black, was neatly combed, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He didn't say good morning. He just met my eyes and said, "Let's go." I paused at the bottom of the stairs. Where? The lawyer's. That was all. He didn't need to explain. I understood him without another word. The drive was slow. The sky was overcast, coated in that dull winter gray that makes everything feel a little heavier. The trees lining the road were bare, their branches stark and skeletal, like they were reaching out to something that would never come back. Sidewalks were still wet from last night's rain, and the frost on the lawns glittered faintly under the pale morning light. Inside the car, the heater blew warm air against our legs, but I still felt cold. My hands were folded in my lap, fingers interlocked so tightly they began to take. I watched the houses pass by, brick homes with white shutters, wreaths still clinging to front doors long after the holidays. Some lights were still up, twinkling faintly, a reminder of a joy I couldn't reach in a mall. We didn't speak on the way there. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't filled with grief like the night before. It had purpose now, clarity. Something inside us had settled, maybe not healed, but hardened, just enough to survive. The notary's office was a modest brick building on the edge of town. We had been there once before, almost 15 years ago, when we first created our will. Back then, we had left everything to the kids. The house, the savings, the life insurance. It had felt obvious, natural. Back then, I still believed that love guarantee of loyalty. Inside, the place smelled faintly of lemonwood polish and old books. The receptionist, a woman named Carol, with warm eyes and a soft voice, greeted us, like old friends. But I saw the moment she noticed something was different. Her smile faltered just slightly. Her eyes lingered on Richard's tightened jaw on the way I clutched my purse a little too tightly. She didn't ask questions. Mr. Haskins, our attorney, was an older man with silver-framed glasses and a slow, measured voice. His office was lined with dark bookshelves, thick rugs, and the quiet hum of a small heater under his desk. "Would you like to review your current arrangements?" he asked gently. Richard didn't even pause. "We'd like to start over." Mr. Haskins didn't blink. He just nodded and pulled out a fresh set of forms. This time, there were no names of children, no trust fund clauses, no paragraphs outlining shared responsibilities or inheritance options. Emily and Jason were gone from the document as if they'd never been part of the plan. Instead, we designated our estate to 3 charities. One for veterans, a cause Richard held close since his own father served in the Korean War, one for single mothers, and one for local libraries where I used to read to children on Saturday mornings, places that knew what it meant to be grateful. As I signed the new will, my hand didn't tremble. I expected to feel sadness or guilt, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something stronger. Stillness like a wind had been raging in me for years and finally settled. My signature curved across the page with purpose. Richard signed next, his grip firm, his expression unreadable. When the final signature dried and the notary sealed the document, something inside me loosened. I hadn't even realized how tense I'd been until I stood up and felt air move more freely through my chest. We stepped back out into the street. A soft drizzle had begun to fall, the kind that barely touched your coat, more like a whisper than rain. But it felt like a washing, a clearing. Richard reached for my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked up at the sky, still gray, still heavy, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel heavy with it. "I think I finally am." That peace, though, didn't last the entire day. Later that evening, I was in the pantry reaching for a tin of chamomile tea when I spotted a box of cookies, Emily's favorite, the shortbread ones with a hint of lemon glaze. I had bought them out of habit for the next visit, the next Sunday breakfast, the next chance to show I still cared. My hand lingered near the box. I didn't pick it up. I just stayed, and it hit me she wouldn't be back. Not really. Not the Emily who used to crawl into bed with me after a nightmare. Not the Emily who used to braid my hair while telling me stories about school. That version of her was gone. I stood there for several long moments, the pantry light buzzing faintly above, its yellow glow casting shadows over the shelves. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I had done enough of that. Instead, I remembered like the time Jason and his wife called us in the middle of the night because their pipes burst and their basement flooded. We showed up with towels, a wet vacuum, and dinner in a thermos. Or the time Emily had strep throat, and I made her soup from scratch, driving 40 minutes just to drop it off at her apartment door because she didn't want company, but I couldn't bear the thought of her suffering alone. All those moments, all those quiet acts of love. And still they had said, "You interfere too much." Still they had accused us of using money as a leash. I could have yelled. I could have reminded them of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every bill paid without hesitation. But I didn't, because somewhere inside me, a voice I hadn't heard in a long time, my own voice, said, "Don't waste your dignity proving your worth." And so I stayed silent, not because I didn't care, but because I cared about myself, too. For once that night, the wind picked up again. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, a steady rhythm like a quiet knock from the world outside, asking if we were okay. In the living room, the fireplace crackled gently. Richard sat across from me, reading the newspaper. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. There was a peace between us, not loud, but steady, built not on forgetting the past, but finally letting go of what was never returned. On the mantel above us sat a photograph. Emily and Jason as children, midlife, covered in flour during a holiday baking day. I stared at it for a long time. My heart didn't ache the way it used to. I still loved them, but I didn't owe them my silence anymore. I didn't owe them my loyalty in the face of their disregard. We had given everything, our time, our money, our love. And now, finally, we had given something back to ourselves. That wasn't bitterness. It was something stronger. It was freedom. It was Sunday morning, just after 8, and the kitchen was filled with the soft hum of the dishwasher finishing a rinse cycle. The sun had started to push through the clouds, casting long amber streaks across the tiled floor. Outside, frost clung to the edges of the windows, slowly melting into clear lines. I opened the curtains halfway, letting in the cold morning light. I had already set the table. 4 plates, 4 cups. The cloth napkins were freshly pressed, and the silverware shone from a thorough polish the night before. I even lit the small candle in the center of the table, the cinnamon one, the same kind I used when the kids were small, and I wanted breakfast to feel like a memory they'd never forget. The smell of toast mixed with a rich scent of brewed coffee. I had made Emily's favorite jam from scratch over the summer, blueberry with a hint of lavender, and brought it out like I always did. I used Jason's preferred dark roast, grinding the beans fresh so the scent would fill the room, earthy and warm. Even now, after everything, I still thought of what they liked. My hands moved out of habit, my heart out of history, not because they deserved it, but because I did, because I wanted to know I had done everything right. The doorbell rang at 9:04. They arrived on time, just like always. Emily wore a soft blue sweater I had given her last Christmas. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes lacked their usual brightness. Jason had his coat slung over one shoulder, phone already in hand, thumb moving across the screen as he greeted me with a one-armed hug. I felt the stiffness in his touch, the pause in Emily's kiss on my cheek, the way their eyes skimmed the room, taking inventory of the space instead of seeing us. They sat without asking if we were well. They didn't mention the last dinner, the one where their words left our hearts bruised. Instead, they picked up their cups and reached for toast like it was any other Sunday. "It smells amazing," Emily said, her tone light, almost forced. Jason added, "Thanks for having us as always." He smiled down at his phone. "Not at us." I nodded and smiled, but it was automatic. Inside, I felt the tension pull across my chest like a rubber band stretched too far. They talked about work, promotions, office drama. Emily mentioned that her friend Carly was moving to Chicago. She rolled her eyes at the idea of Midwestern winters. Jason complained about daycare costs and how people keep having kids they can't afford. He said it with a chuckle, sipping his coffee like he hadn't just insulted half the people we knew. They never asked how we were. Not once. And then Jason leaned back and said, "Well, I figured if the folks are always going to be there to bail me out, I might as well treat myself now and then." He was joking, but it didn't feel like a joke. I felt the words press into my chest. That familiar dull ache began to build behind my ribs. I looked over at Richard. He had paused with his knife halfway through a piece of toast. His jaw tightened. He didn't look up. Then Emily chimed in, completely unfazed. "We were actually hoping you guys could help with a down payment. Again, just for a new place outside the city. It would really give us some breathing room again." That word hit harder than it should have, but it was the way she said it casually, like she was asking for another scoop of potatoes. No thank you, no hesitation, no understanding. I stopped chewing. My hands lowered slowly to my lap. Jason was already reaching for more jam, unaware. They didn't see us. Not really. Just the things we could give them. The comfort, the help, the backup plan. I glanced across the table, met Richard's eyes, and he gave the smallest of nods. I turned back to them and set my fork down gently. The sound of it meeting the porcelain seemed louder than it should have. "Emily, Jason," I said quietly. Both of them looked up, half smiling. "You were right," I said. Emily blinked. "About what?" "You said you didn't meet us, that we interfere. Thought our help feels like a leash." Jason's smile faded. Emily tilted her head. "Mom." I raised my hand slightly, just enough to ask for silence. I didn't want to be interrupted. That's why we changed the will. The silence that followed was sharp, tangible. Jason sat down his coffee slowly. Emily's mouth opened, then closed again. "What do you mean?" Jason asked. Richard spoke then. "Calm, steady. We removed both of you from everything." Emily went pale. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Wait, you what?" "You said you wanted space. You said we hold too much over you. So, we made sure we said." Jason stared at me, confusion and something like anger flickering across his face. "That's not fair," he said. And that more than anything made something in me go still, because I had said that same sentence once when I was 19 and my father told me he wouldn't co-sign a loan for college. Back then I was furious. I told myself he didn't care, that he was punishing me. But now I saw it differently. Sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in ease. Sometimes it's a closed door, a limit, a line. I stood and began clearing the plates. Not with anger, but because I couldn't sit in that space any longer. Neither of them moved to help. Emily looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Jason just sat there, shoulders slightly hunched, staring into his cup. They both rose a few minutes later, quiet, unsure. They left without hugging us, without saying thank you. The front door closed with a soft click. I stood at the window and watched them walk down the driveway. Their coats caught the wind. Jason was already on his phone again. Richard came beside me, placed a hand on my back. We didn't speak. Later, as I washed the dishes, and he dried them, the sun finally pushed fully through the clouds. A single beam lit up the table we had just left, the still warm coffee pot, the folded napkins, the half-empty jam jar. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a strange peace. Not joy, not yet, but something stronger. The kind of peace that comes when you realize you've stopped asking to be seen and started seeing yourself again. 3 days passed before we heard anything. It came as a single-line text from Jason. "Hey, can we talk?" I stayed at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I finally realized I didn't owe him one. It was late afternoon. The sky outside was turning a soft orange, melting into lavender at the edges. Wind rustled the trees in the yard, and the distant sound of children playing echoed from somewhere down the street. A quiet, ordinary moment. But my heart wasn't in it. I wasn't waiting anymore. Richard was sitting beside me in the living room, newspaper folded on his lap, his reading glasses resting halfway down his nose. He hadn't seen the message yet. I handed him my phone. He read it, then looked at me. "Do you want to?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not now." And he didn't ask again. The next message came from Emily 2 days later, a longer one full of soft language. "We didn't mean to hurt you. Maybe we should all sit down and clear the air. We've been under a lot of pressure." There was no apology, just explanation, just a gentle attempt to smooth things over without actually taking responsibility. I read it 3 times before locking my phone and placing it face down on the side table. Some things don't need to be explained anymore. Some things have already been said, not just once, but over and over in 1,000 smaller ways. I remembered how Emily used to say, "I'm just being honest," right after saying something cold. I remembered how Jason used to laugh when I tried to share family stories like they were too old to matter. Every word they said lately had been soaked in the same message. "You're not needed anymore." But the moment we stopped offering, they came running back. Not out of love, but out of panic. Panic that the lifeline had finally been cut. And that was when I knew, really knew, it had never been about us. It had always been about what we gave. That weekend, we took a drive. Richard and I hadn't done that in a long time. Not without a destination or an obligation. Just driving. The sky was clear and blue. The roads were quiet. We followed the highway until it curved into back roads, past golden fields and quiet barns, past diners we hadn't visited in years. At one point, we pulled into a rest stop and sat on a bench near a row of pine trees. The air smelled like soil and sap. I closed my eyes and just breathed. "We spent so many years running," I said quietly. "Running to help. Running to fix." Richard reached for my hand. "Now we walk." I looked at him. There was something different in his face. Not younger, but lighter. A man who had set something heavy down. And I realized I felt it too. That constant tension, the waiting to be needed, the hoping to be appreciated. It was gone. In its place was something simpler, cleaner, stillness. On Monday morning, I checked my email and saw a message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Thank you for the books." I opened it. It was from a young woman who ran the local library branch, where we had made one of our donations. She wrote about how the funds were being used to restore the children's reading corner, bin bags, shelves, new picture books. She said the kids had started calling it the story garden. She attached a photo row of colorful books. A child curled up in a sunlit corner with a stuffed bear in his lap. I stayed at that photo for a long time. And for the first time in weeks, I cried, not out of sadness, but because someone saw the value in what we gave. Someone used it to grow something. Emily called that night. I let it ring. Jason followed with a text. "We need to talk, please." But I didn't need to anymore. I sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around my legs. The room was quiet except for the sound of the clock ticking and Richard flipping pages of his book. I looked around the living room at the photo frames on the walls, the candle flickering low, the fresh flowers from the garden I had finally tended to again. It was enough. We were enough. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. I had always thought peace would come wrapped in reunion, in apologies, in mended fences. But peace had come in another form, not in their retain, but in our release. in no longer needing to chase love from people who had shown us too many times that their love came with terms. Now, when I think about Emily and Jason, I don't feel empty. I feel full, full of memories, full of effort, full of the love we gave them freely. But I also feel boundaries, quiet ones, invisible but strong, and I no longer feel guilty for building them. Because the truth is, love should never be something you have to earn by shrinking. It should not be payment for silence or proof of usefulness. And if it is, it's not love. I realized age is not about weakness. It's about dignity. And dignity starts the moment you stop apologizing for drawing the line. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, you're not alone. If you've given everything and been told it's still not enough, I see you. And if you're standing quietly in your own kitchen, unsure of what happens next, maybe the answer isn't outside you at all. Maybe it's the silence that follows and the peace that comes after you finally say no.
Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon. Thanks for watching.